Hey everyone, it is Chris. Welcome to Tree and Monk's Temple. And with the new 2024 rules, what I want to do is share the learnings I'm gaining as I do these videos with you on what kind of damage we can expect from the various classes with the new rules. Because I'm editing this video and I can't help but notice I keep glancing at something. I don't know what, because I don't have a script. So I don't know what it is. I apologize that you could keep seeing me glancing at, I think I'm looking at a graph that has nothing to do with what I'm saying. But anyway, sorry for that. Let's continue with the video. Assumptions based on years of experience with various classes and how much damage I would expect them to do that have all changed because we've had revisions to the classes and the subclasses. We've had revisions to feats, some of them dramatic. We have weapon masteries that didn't exist in 2024, and some of them increased damage as well. And so what I wonder is, I know what I think a fighter does for damage. Does that still apply with the 2024 rules, or has it changed somewhat? So this video series is a learning process. I'm doing some math, and then I'm graphing the various damage for the various classes so that we can just look at them and see what's going on. And what you see right in front of you right now is what I call the baseline, or I used to call it the baseline. Now I'm calling it Warlock Baseline, and it might not even be the Warlock Baseline by the time I'm done this whole process. This is based on a Warlock using Eldritch Blast and doing some very, very simple things to increase their damage with their Eldritch Blast. And what we have here is a line that represents the average damage I would expect on a round-by-round basis based on our level. So we have levels at the bottom from 1 to 20, and then on the side we have damage from 0 up to 40 on this particular graph. And what we see here are just exactly what we would expect. We start out not doing a whole lot of damage. Level 5 it really jumps, at level 11 it really jumps, and then level 17 it really jumps. And those represent our 4 tiers of play as well. So that level 1 through 4, that's tier 1. Level 5 through 10, that's tier 2. Level 11 through 16, that is tier 3. And level 17 and right up to 20, that is tier 4. And I kind of like the way this graph works because it jumps exactly when our tiers change. And that's the way Eldritch Blast works. And what I have always done is if I do a build, I'll punch some math and figure out what the damage per round is for that build at various levels, and I'll compare it to this. And the idea is if it is a character that's supposed to do damage on top of a bunch of other things, so damage might not be, their primary goal, they should still meet these numbers. But if it is a build that is supposed to do a whole bunch of damage, it should be well above this graph, because this doesn't represent high damage. This represents okay damage. It's a starting point, a baseline. Now, my issue is I'm not certain this even represents a starting point anymore. I'm not certain that an Eldritch Blast using Warlock is even an okay way to go if you want to deliver damage anymore, because it seems to me like the damage has changed enough in 2024 where this is now low damage. And I'll show you what I mean. I have looked at the rogue, I've looked at the monk, and I've looked at the fighter, and I've done some very basic math with some very basic builds, and no subclass, and there's no subclass for the warlock either. And what I found is in every case, the damage is significantly above the baseline. And so that makes me wonder if this baseline is really a starting point anymore, or if I should be looking for something else. And what I want to do is I want to kind of go through the various classes, and so I will get a whole bunch of lines on this graph and see what's going on and make a decision at that point, and I want to share that information with you. I do want to mention a couple things, though. The first thing I want to mention is this is single target damage. If I throw a fireball and I hit 10 enemies, I can do a whole bunch of damage. But I'm only doing 1/10 of that to the big bad guy. If I want to focus on that big bad guy with damage, that's a lot more effective tactically. So comparing that 10 times fireball damage to single target damage doesn't really tell us anything. That fireball serves its purpose, but it's a different purpose than single target damage. If we just look at the damage that Fireball does to that big bad enemy, it's actually not all that impressive for the level. So I'm focusing on single target damage here. So things like weapon masteries, where we have something like Cleave. Cleave is a decent mastery. We can hit a second target and we can deliver some damage to them, and that is useful. What it's not useful for is killing the first guy. And that's what so this is a very narrow focus, this process I'm going through. But anyway, what we see from these numbers is that we have the monk, the rogue, and the fighter doing almost the same damage all through tier 1. And then they do almost the same damage all through tier 2. And through tier 3 and 4, the monk and the the rogue do about the same damage, but the fighter really excels in tier 3. That's when they get their third attack. And we can see this line right here, this dark green line. And I'm using an arrow here because I had a comment from a colorblind user saying they can't tell the color difference. And so I'm going to try using these arrows to show you which line I'm talking about. This is the fighter. And we can see starting at level 11 through level 16, there is a gap. So we see the fighter is probably our best choice for damage dealing amongst these three classes at those levels. And then tier 4, it's not so clear because although the fighter is doing the most damage in tier 4, we have points where, like, the rogue is doing just as much damage effectively at level 19. Should also mention these numbers are estimates, and they're based on all kinds of assumptions that I try to be transparent about when I do the calculations. And today I want to look at the Barbarian, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, if you are new here and you have not subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing. I am pushing for 100,000 subscribers. I'm very, very close. So every subscription makes a big difference. I would appreciate it a lot. But today what I want to do is I want to look at the Barbarian damage and see how it compares to these three classes. And I will be doing more videos, and we're going to look at all the classes that do single target damage, including the Warlock. Because as has been pointed out to me, and this is totally true, this might not be the Warlock baseline anymore. Because does a Warlock even want to use Eldritch Blast anymore, or do they want to use Blade Pact? I think we should look at the math and see what the difference is and how it compares to the other classes. So I will be doing that at some point in this video series. But today we're just going to look at the Barbarian. I'm going to do some very simple things to try to get decent damage on a Barbarian and graph it, and then we'll compare it to these other classes, and it will give us an idea of how the Barbarian compares. So I have here the 2024 Barbarian, and I'm not worrying about what species they are. There are certain species that can increase your damage, and I want to know what we do before we make that selection. Same thing with the subclass. Editing me interrupting the video yet again, but for all the times I glanced at my notes here, I missed the note where I was going to explain why I'm not doing a 2014 build. So I'm going to explain it to you now. For the monk, the rogue, and the fighter, I did a 2014 build so we could compare, and we could see that the new damage is significantly higher. And I intended originally to do that for all the classes, and doing that math for the 2014 builds is so boring that I'm relieving myself of that. I'm going to make the assumption, amongst many other assumptions, but I'm going to be making the assumption that we kind of have an idea how much damage the 2014 classes do, and save myself the work of going back and just doing those old builds again. And with the Barbarian as well, I would expect 2024 to do a lot more damage than the 2014 version. But yeah, so that's why you're not seeing a 2014 build here. With this build, I'll be using a greatsword, and I like a greatsword for a Barbarian because it keeps our bonus action available. We could use a polearm. We could take polearm master, and we could be making bonus action attacks, but that will prevent me doing other things with my bonus action, including maybe activating rage. And that's not ideal for a Barbarian. In fact, in the 2024 rules, there's lots of bonus action conflicts to consider. So I like the greatsword because it leaves that out of the equation. We don't have to worry about it. It's going to give us a weapon mastery. That weapon mastery is Graze. What Graze says is if we miss, we get to do our ability score modifier for damage anyway. So if we have a strength of 5, we get to do 5 damage even if we miss. And that's just a straight damage boost. Then I'm assuming that we're going to, I think I looked at the farmer background, but for background, whatever it is, I'm going to assume we're going to increase our strength by +2. That's what counts. And we're not taking an origin feat that increases damage. And I had a conversation with someone today. They were talking about fighter damage, and they were pointing out that, if we took Savage Attacker as our origin feat, we could increase our damage a little bit. That is true. Savage Attacker is one of the only origin feats that actually increases your damage. Tavern Brawler does if you're using unarmed strikes. The thing is Savage Attacker is not a good feat. And although it's the only one that increases our damage, so if we're just looking at this little narrow thing that I'm doing in these videos, yes, it increases the number, but I would never recommend it. I would generally avoid it on my own character. So I'll probably play characters with Savage Attacker once in a while, but if I'm making the best character I can, the most optimized character I can, Savage Attacker is not on the list because it's not all about damage. And the damage increase from Savage Attacker is very small. So my assumption would be that if we are making a Barbarian and we're considering optimization at all, Savage Attacker is not the feat we're going to take, even though it increases our damage. So let's look at our feat progression. So we are going to take Great Weapon Master at level 4, and Great Weapon Master now increases your strength. So that'll get us to a strength of 18. That's a +4 modifier. At level 8, we're just going to increase our strength. So we'll get it up to 20. Level 12, we're going to take Mage Slayer. Mage Slayer does not increase damage, but if I was a Barbarian, I'd look to get Mage Slayer on my list. What Mage Slayer does is amongst other things, if we fail a Charisma, Intelligence, or Wisdom saving throw, we can choose to succeed instead once per long rest. That is a fantastic feature. And Barbarians, one of the problems with them is because you generally want to have a great strength and you probably still want a good dexterity and constitution. There's not much left for the other 3 ability scores. We're not proficient in saving throws for any of those ability scores, and that leaves a significant weakness. Mage Slayer helps fix that up. So I would just take Mage Slayer even though it doesn't increase the damage. That's why I'm putting it here. And Speedy, same thing, not increasing the damage, though it probably does. In fact, Mage Slayer probably increases your damage as well, because a character who is not paralyzed is going to do more damage than the character that failed their save against Whole Person. And with Speedy, the character that gets to melee is going to do more damage than the character that couldn't quite get there. And Speedy can make that difference, but it doesn't show on the math that I'm doing in these videos. But I would recommend these. These are good feats. And I'm taking the boon of Irresistible Offense. Again, it's not the feat for epic boons that is going to deliver the most damage on these graphs. That would be the boon of combat prowess. But I would recommend that if you are playing a character using a weapon that can't change your damage type, like Barbarians, Irresistible Offense is going to help you if you are ever facing resistance to the damage type that you do. So I do think it's an insurance feat, right? It just makes sure that the math we're doing in this video actually is going to apply more often. And that's what it does. And as I said, I'm giving you rough estimates, and I have to make assumptions. These are some assumptions that I make. I am assuming 4 combats per long rest, 4 rounds of combats, 1 short rest in the middle. That might match some of you. It's not going to match a lot of you, and but you got to guess something. And so that's what I'm going to guess. I assume no outside source of advantage or disadvantage. So if you are going to have advantage, you have to generate it for yourself. And I should mention, since we're talking about the Barbarian, this is a good time to bring this up. The Barbarian at level 2 has their own way to generate advantage with Reckless Attack, and it's pretty much reliable. And what you do is when you do the figures for damage, we're going to apply that advantage, and it's going to increase our damage numbers, as it should. But by assuming there's no outside source of advantage or disadvantage, that's not 100% accurate, because sometimes you do have an outside source of advantage or disadvantage. More often than not, it's a source of advantage because maybe somebody else knocked that enemy prone, or they stunned that enemy, or they paralyzed that enemy. And so we have advantage without generating it ourselves. And in that case, reckless attack doesn't help us, but it sure helps the fighter, or, it sure helps the monk. And so when I show you the damage for the barbarian, just keep in mind, I'm assuming advantage through reckless attack, but I'm not assuming advantage from any outside source. So take those damage numbers with the grain of salt that would obviously present. Target armor class, I kind of do a progression. We start at 14, we end at 17. I assume our character can achieve melee combat. These characters are going to do less damage if they can't. Great Weapon Master provides a bonus action attack on critical hits. With Great Weapon Master, you can get a bonus action attack if you score a critical hit. You can also score, or you can get a bonus action attack if you down an enemy. With the big damage dealers, like fighters and barbarians who are hitting hard on single targets, my expectation is that you're probably going to be trying to get to the big bad guy. The big bad guy is the one with the most hit points. And once you drop that big bad guy, it's mostly just cleanup. So then it really doesn't matter that much how much damage you're doing. You're going to win. So I'm not counting the dropping the target in terms of these damage numbers. I'm just looking at if you score a critical hit, you're going to get a bonus action attack. I assume that we're going to use Rage on round 1, and that Rage is available. Sometimes you might have Rage up already, especially with these new rules. You can maintain your Rage outside of combat. It can last for 10 minutes. But quite often, we're still going to have to Rage on round 1. So that's what I'm assuming we're doing. And we've kept our bonus action free, so that should be fine. And I'm going to assume that we use Reckless Attack as soon as we get it. I think most barbarians do. And we have Brutal Strikes, which is a new mechanic. I'll get to the mechanics of it when we get to 9th level. But what I'm going to do is Brutal Strike will take away your advantage, but give you an extra d10 of damage. And so I'm going to do 2 damage calculations. And I'm going to show you how much damage you do if you use Brutal Strikes and how much damage you don't. For our DPR calculations, I'll just use the one that generates greater damage. All right, so let's look at the math. I'm not going to go through it line by line. I'm just going to give you results. So this chart has 3 columns. Left side is our level. The center column is features. This is more just a reminder to me to make adjustments as we get things with level. So if our damage has gone up, I make sure it reminds me to apply it. The numbers that matter here in terms of our DPR, on the right column, that's my DPR math calculations. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the math, but my expected damage at level 1 is 8.8, and then it becomes 11.3 at level 2. Doesn't change at level 3. Level 4, we're up to 14.8. I'm just making sure all the math is up on screen there. Then level 5, we go to 28.7. Level 6, 31.1, stays the same at level 7. Level 8, 33.5. And level 9, we're now going to get Brutal Strike. And so now I want to tell you what it does. So what Brutal Strike does is, like I said, we can give up advantage on an attack that we use Reckless Attack on. So we must use Reckless Attack. If we got advantage from some other source, we can't give that up. We have to use Reckless Attack, and then we have to give up any source of advantage. So, we give up advantage from Reckless Attack, and the enemy is prone. We're still not attacking with advantage. We're attacking straight up, 100%. And we can't have disadvantage either, so it's always straight up. If we hit, we do an additional d10 damage. And if we hit, we also get another effect. And that's the main reason you want to do Brutal Strikes. I would not do Brutal Strikes for the d10 alone. I'm going to go show you the math why I wouldn't. But at level 9, if we hit with our Brutal Strike, we get to push them 15 feet, plus we get a move of half our movement speed without provoking opportunity attacks. So we can push them and then we can follow them and then hit them again. Or we could slow them 15 feet. And what this does is it gives us an additional level of control. So Brutal Strike, not necessarily doing it for damage. I'm doing it for additional levels of control that the Barbarian has never had before. And so I show here Reckless Attack damage. I show here Brutal Strike damage. Reckless Attack damage, 17.5. Brutal Strike damage, 17.3. It is barely significant or statistically significant whether you use Reckless Attack or Brutal Strike in terms of how much damage you deliver. It's almost the same, which means that Brutal Strike, I wouldn't use it to increase my damage, but it's not really going to decrease my damage in any significant way either, just a tiny bit. And this also depends on armor class. I'm assuming a certain armor class. If you increase the armor class, then Brutal Strike's a little worse. And if we reduce the armor class, Brutal Strike's a little better. But based on my assumptions, they're almost the same, whether you do one or the other. So, although I'm going to use Reckless Attack because the number is higher, I would say that I would have no problem using Brutal Strike and making that tiny bit of difference in terms of damage to get the control. I should also note that the damage for the bonus action attack changes a bit whether we use Brutal Strike or not, because there's a greater chance of getting that critical hit if we're attacking with advantage than if we use Brutal Strike and give that advantage up. So our bonus action attack is adding on average 2 points of damage, or 1.5 if we use Brutal Strike. So our DPR is 36.9, but if we were to use Brutal Strike, it does drop to 36.2, which isn't that big a drop, like I said. But I'm going to assume it's at 36.9, which holds for levels 10, 11, or 12. I wish Barbarians got a damage boost at level 11, but they don't. All right, at level 13, things are going to increase for us. So DPR goes to 38.6 or 37.7 with Brutal Strike. Holds at 14 and 15. Rage damage goes up at 16. So now we're at 40.3 or 39.2 with Brutal Strike. And then at level 17, we have a change to Brutal Strike where now it's going to deliver 2d10 damage, and we can do two options when we hit with it. And I didn't go over it as we went over those levels, but we have more options than just pushing and slowing enemies now. We can do things like give them disadvantage on their next saving throw. Cool stuff. So we're now increasing the damage from Brutal Strike, and if we look at the math here, Reckless Attack, an attack with Reckless Attack now does 20 damage on average. Brutal Strike, it does 22.7. So Brutal Strike is actually worthwhile for damage at level 17, in addition to multiple levels of control. I think if you are playing a 17th level Barbarian with the 2024 rules, it's going to feel very different than playing a 2014 Barbarian, just for all the things that Brutal Strike allows you to do. I think it's quite cool, to be honest. And then we get our bonus action attack, and our DPR is 44.3. And that's with Brutal Strike. It's 41.6 without. So I'd use Brutal Strike all the time when I got to level 17. Level 18, no change. Level 19, we had our Epic Boon. And like I said, the Boon of Irresistible Offense is largely an insurance feat. So it's not going to show a lot of damage on this chart. It increases our critical hit damage by quite a bit, but critical hits just don't happen often enough. And if we increase our critical range because we took Champion Fighter or something, that doesn't apply. Yeah, it has to be nat 20s. So our damage goes up to 47.7, so it does jump a little bit. And then at level 20, we get our big Barbarian Capstone, which increases our strength and dexterity by 4 each. What's relevant here is our strength will now be +7. This also affects Graze. Graze does our ability score and damage, so it now does 7 damage. And our chance to hit has improved. All right. So Reckless attacks are now doing 25.7, Brutal Strike 29.3. So once again, I'd use it every round. And our DPR will end up being 57.1, and that's with Brutal Strike, or 54.3 without. If I take the DPR that this Barbarian delivers at all 20 levels and add it together, it's 667.7. If I divide that by 20, that means on average, through 20 levels of play, we're doing 33.4. I'm calling this a DPR value. And so the DPR value for the base Barbarian is 33.4. And how does that compare to the other classes? Let me just look at my notes here. If you excuse me, the fighter base damage DPR value is 36.2, so the fighter does more damage than the barbarian. The monk base damage is 31.8, and the rogue base damage is 31.7. So the barbarian is doing more damage than the rogue or the monk, but not very much more damage. It's very, very comparable. And I do think it is more valuable to look on it or to look at it on a graph because it really tells us what's going on. So the barbarian line is in purple right here, okay? And what I find so interesting about this is, I said the fighter does more damage. Well, take a look at this. It depends. It depends what tier of play you're playing in. At tier 1, all the classes that I've looked at so far do very comparable damage. Then in tier 2, the fighter, the rogue, and the monk are all doing about the same amount of damage. But look at the barbarian. The barbarian is killing it in tier 2. Then in tier 3, the barbarian ends up matching, again, the rogue and the monk. They do about the same amount of damage, all three classes. This is where the fighter excels. And then tier 4, fighter seems to be doing the best, followed by the rogue, and then the monk and the barbarian are at the back of the bus, which makes it good that they're getting good capstones because it looks like they need those good capstones. So what's interesting to me is, we can look at the DPR values that I talk about and say, oh, well, fighter does more damage, so I'm making an 8th level character. I should look at making a fighter if I want to do the most damage. Not according to these numbers. According to these numbers, you should make a barbarian at level 8 or even level 5. It's only once you get to level 11 that the fighter starts to outdamage the barbarian. In fact, the barbarian outdamages the fighter from level 1 through level 10. And then the fighter outdamages the barbarian up from there. So that's what happens to the baseline. And what I've been doing in these videos is I've been looking and saying, okay, well, what if we do a little bit of optimization? Then what do the numbers look like? And with the barbarian, we have 4 classes or 4 subclasses that very clearly affect damage in different ways. The Wild Tree the World Tree and Wild Heart Barbarian, got the names mixed up there, do not affect this damage at all. So what you see there for barbarian damage on this graph applies to a barbarian made with World Tree or Wild Heart. Zealot increases damage. Berserker increases it even more. So I want to look at actually both of those. And I want to make a very similar build to my base barbarian and see how it affects the damage. So I'm going to look at the Zealot first, and my expectation is the Zealot will do less damage than the Berserker, and I think the math on it is actually pretty much indisputable. There's a 10th level feature that the Berserker gets that increases their damage. The Zealot gets a feature at level 10 that boosts their allies, which is not necessarily worse than increasing your own damage, but it doesn't increase your own single target damage. All right, so Zealot Barbarian, and it's basically the same build. So great sword, same ability scores, same feats as the base Barbarian. What I do need to do is look at the specifics for Divine Fury and the assumptions that I make in regards to them. Divine Fury is what's going to increase our damage with the Zealot, and that is a 3rd level feature, and it says that if we hit with an attack on our turn while raging, we can add a d6 plus half our Barbarian level rounded down. So that means if I have extra attack, if I miss with my first attack but hit with my second attack, I still get to apply Divine Fury. So I have to do the Divine Fury damage separately, because what I basically need to do is what is my chance of at least hitting once on my turn, and that's how I figure out my Divine Fury damage. Now, we do get a bonus action some of the time through Great Weapon Master, but that will never trigger Divine Fury, because in order to get that bonus action in the first place, it meant we already hit. So we already used Divine Fury. For the chance of critical for Divine Fury, it's not 10% like it is with most reckless attacks. With Divine Fury, what I have to do is take my chance to crit on attack 1, plus my chance of missing on attack 1 and my chance to crit on attack 2, That ends up being 11% if we make 2 reckless attacks, or 10% if we're using Brutal Strike, which is the same as the damage number I use for, a regular attack that's with advantage. So the difference is tiny, but it's there, so I do include it. Otherwise, the assumptions are the same. Okay, so let's look at damage. Level 1 and 2 will not be changed from the numbers we looked at previously, 8.8, then 11.3. Level 3 is where we get Divine Fury, and I've done the calculations on the right side there. So the rightmost boxes are calculations for Divine Fury and what it adds to our damage. And if we look in the center box, the Barbarian, the base Barbarian, does 11.3 at level 3. The Zealot does 15.5 damage at level 3. That is a huge increase to damage, almost 50% increase to damage just by being a Zealot. Level 4, we're at 19.8. Level 5, 34.4. Level 6, 37.8. Level 7 stays the same. Level 8, it's 41.2. And that's versus 33.5 for a regular Barbarian. So what we can see is the difference from being a Zealot does scale with our level. It doesn't scale at the same rate as our base damage. So this is a smaller chunk of the pie in general. We're not increasing our damage by 50% anymore, but we're still probably increasing it by close to 25%. So it's still a lot of damage. Level 9, 44.6. Level 10, 45.5, stays the same at 11. Then up to 46.5, 48.2 at 13. 49.2 at 14 and 15, then 51.9 at 16. 17, we're up to 55.5, 18, 56.5, 19, 59.9, and at level 20, we're at 70.6 against the regular Barbarian, which was 57.1. That is still a very big difference, about, 13 and a half points of damage. And so if we look at the DPR and add it together for all the levels, that's 829.4. Divided by 20, that's 41.5. So let's look at it on the graph. So at level 1 and 2, of course, no change from being a Zealot. But here, this line is being a Zealot. This is how much it increases it. And it's just a pretty big gap right at level 3, and it just gets bigger as we go up. And against the baseline, I mean, it's not even close. At level 20, it's about double what the baseline will be. In fact, it's pretty much double the baseline from level 5 up. So just a huge increase to damage. Now, I've done kind of optimized builds for the Monk and the Rogue and the Fighter, and I just want to give you some comparisons. The DPR value for the Zealot is 41.5. For let's see, the Way of Shadow Monk, it was 42.9. For the Assassin Rogue, it was 41.3. And for the Champion Fighter, it was 41.1. So we have some very, very comparable numbers for the various classes. But like I said, I don't think Zealot is our best choice for straight single target damage. I think it's Berserker. So let's look at that. So once again, I'm not really changing the build. I'm just making it a Berserker. So it's the same ability score, same weapon, same ability score increases. What I've put here is Frenzy works if we hit at least once on our turn using Reckless Attack. That's the difference between Frenzy and Divine Fury. Divine Fury, you don't have to use Reckless Attack. So if you got advantage from some other source, then you could get Divine Fury, but you can't get Frenzy. Otherwise, Frenzy and Divine Fury do very similar damage. It's never going to be our bonus action attack for the same reason. Chance of critical for Frenzy is the same as it was for Divine Fury, though we get more damage with Frenzy because it's more dice. The flat bonus from Divine Fury doesn't increase with a critical. Retaliation is our level 10 feature, and what it does is it provides a reaction attack if an enemy hits us with an attack. I assume that's going to happen a lot, right? You're a barbarian. The enemy is attacking you. It tends to work that way. And at the tables I played at, Barbarian rushes up to the enemy, starts hitting them for big damage. The enemy attacks the Barbarian back. The Berserker is going to get a retaliation attack, and I'm going to assume half the time. On half the rounds, we're going to get it. Otherwise, all the same, assumptions that I had for the other builds. All right, so here we go. Level 1 and 2, again, there's going to be no change, but the additional column here on the right is going to calculate both the frenzy damage, and then once we get to level 10, I will also calculate the retaliation damage there, and then add it on. All right, so level 3, we add frenzy, we go up to 17.9. That is a huge increase from 11.3, even more than the Zealot. Level 4, we're up to 21.4. Level 5, we're up to 36.6. Level 6, we're at 38.7. Level 7, we're at 38.7 as well, up to 41.1 at level 8. At level 9, we're at 48.2. Level 10, 55.3. Level 11, 55.3. This DPR is kind of where the other Barbarian caps out, is in that ballpark. This is where the Berserker is at level 10. Level 12, 55.3. Level 13, we're up to 57. Stays the same at 14 and 15. Then at level 16, it jumps again. We're up to 62.9. Level 17, 63.7. Level 18, 63.7. Level 19, we're up to 70.8. And at level 20, 81.8 damage. If I add all of these numbers together, I get 942.2 divided by 20, which is an average damage or DPR value of 47.1 over 20 levels of play. That is not just the highest number that we have seen so far. It's significantly the highest number. The second highest number we've had is the Warrior of Shadow Monk at 42.9. That is the difference. Quite a bit. Let's look on a graph. So on this graph, I have the baseline. It's right there. It's blue. I then have the base Barbarian. It's there. It's red. I have the Zealot. It's there. It's green. And I have the Berserker. It's there. It's orange. And it's just a very impressive number or in graph. What I really notice here is if you remember the Barbarian compared to the other classes, what did we see? We saw in Tier 2, the Barbarian excels. If we look at Tier 2 here, what I see is, with the exception of level 10, the Zealot and the Berserker are almost the same. Just almost the same right from level 1 through level 9. It is level 10, when we get retaliation, that then we see the gap. So at level 11, the Berserker is going to make up for the fact that Barbarians don't get a lot at level 11, and we should still be able to deliver good damage right through level 20, where we're delivering over 80 damage per round, and this is sustained damage. We're not, blowing a bunch of resources here. We have more than enough rages to be raging all the time, and we're just attacking with a greatsword and doing really, really impressive numbers. And so if I did want to not make a fighter in Tier 3 and I want to deliver a lot of single target damage, I'd look at the Berserker. The Berserker is going to deliver good damage at every level of play. Okay, so that is the Barbarian. Now, in my last video, I did the fighter, and I was talking about using longsword and shield. And, I like the idea of a longsword and shield using character. I want that kind of character to be good, and I did some calculations for the fighter where I determined it wasn't very good. And the viewer noticed I made some math errors there that affect everything from level 8 through level 20. So I do want to correct that. But I also want to look at the Barbarian, because now I'm wondering, if I look at the Berserker and I'm delivering Divine Fury or Frenzy damage, with the Zealot I'm doing Divine Fury damage, and those are adding a lot of damage that aren't based on my weapon. So if I'm using a longsword and shield, those numbers shouldn't really change. And then retaliation will also increase damage for Berserker, whether I'm using a longsword or not. It won't increase it quite as much, but we don't apply Great Weapon Master to reaction attack, so it's not going to affect it a huge amount. Our rage bonus damage is standardized, so that doesn't care what kind of weapon we're using. So what I wonder is, what about a long sword and shield using Barbarian? Does that work? And that's iconic too. You know, there's lots of depictions of Conan Online with him using a sword and a shield, and then the bare chest, right? Is that a viable character in the 2024 rules? I'll tell you, it wasn't really in the 2014 rules, but I think that might have changed. So what I want to do, it's going to take, I want to correct the numbers I had for the fighter. I want to see what Sword and Shield looks like on a Berserker. I want to see what Sword and Shield looks like on a Zealot. And there's enough there that I think that's an entire video. So that's actually going to be my next video before we go into our next class. But I will be looking at Paladins. I think Paladin will be the next class I look at. And I want to look at Rangers. I want to look at the Warlock again and see whether Blade Pact really changes things and what the new numbers look like if we use Blade Pact. And I probably want to look at some other classes too. You know, a Valor Bard would be worthy to look at. Now, if we're using Conjure Minor Elementals, these graphs are pointless because Conjure Minor Elementals is so busted that I'm going to show you how busted, actually, before we go any further. The purple line represents a Valor Bard using Conjure Minor Elementals, and they get it at level 10. You can see the jump at level 10. By the way, it's this line right here, the purple one. Then we see what happens after that. And this is the problem with upskilling on Conjure Minor Elementals. If you don't house rule it, this is what you get. Okay? It's just a joke. So I don't know who punched the math at Wizards of the Coast for this. I don't understand how it ended up being this. But it's ridiculous. So I will not be assuming Conjure Minor Elementals for any Valor Bard builds. But that is my look at the Barbarian damage and Sword and Shield damage coming in my next video. Hope you join me. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.